Welcome back, fight fans. This video is brought to you by AB Combat. Winning UFC gold isn't always the be-all and end-all of a great career. And just as there have been a few not-so-great fighters who somehow managed to win a UFC title, there have been many amazing athletes who could just never reach that point. Here are 10 great fighters that never won a UFC title. Alexander Gustafsson. Alexander Gustafsson managed to give Jon Jones one of the toughest fights of his life, but to boil his entire 205-pound run down to one amazing performance would be to miss the point. Sure, the Mauler never quite managed to capture UFC gold, but he took the two greatest light heavyweights of all time, Jones and Daniel Cormier, right down to the wire. And in his victories over guys like Shogun Rua, Jan Blachowicz, and a total clinic against Glover Teixeira, and you're looking at one hell of a career.
Unbelievable! There it is! Alexander!
With insane length for his weight class and some of the best hands in the sport, Gustafsson remains one of Europe's finest MMA exports. Joseph Benavidez. Sometimes a great fighter's progress is stifled due to the presence of another fighter who is simply a shade greater. Or, in the case of Demetrius Johnson and Joseph Benavidez, Mighty Mouse managed to eventually make his superiority very clear. For years, Benavidez had that number one contender spot pretty much locked down. He was capable of beating every other fighter in the division. But when push came to shove, he would always fall short against DJ. Joe B had an incredibly solid MMA skill set, and prior to losing to Sergio Pettis in his 30th career fight, he had only ever lost to two divisional GOATs in Dominic Cruz at 135 pounds and Mighty Mouse at 125. Uriah Faber. Uriah Faber may have put the lower weight classes on the map after his memorable WEC run, but when it came to his time in the UFC, it was a real case of always the bridesmaid, never the bride for the California Kid. In fact, up until his 40th career fight with Frankie Edgar, Faber had only ever lost in title fights, coming up short against Renan Barrow and Dominic Cruz. But even with that being the case, Faber's grittiness and hard-nosed approach to getting the win always made him a live dog in there, even in his later years as he fought past his 40th birthday. Demian Maia. Demian Maia is without question one of the greatest BJJ to MMA transitioners we have ever had the pleasure of watching. And after fighting for UFC gold on two different occasions, it can't be said that Maia's time in the sport wasn't successful. If he was able to secure the takedown, you could all but guarantee that he was going to slice through your defenses like butter. Sure, he didn't get the job done against Anderson Silva or Tyrone Woodley, but he had more than enough highlights in his run to warrant his place on this list. Chael Sonnen. The biggest arms in West Lynn, Oregon came just about as close to winning 2 UFC titles as you could possibly get. We all know that Chael Sonnen had his way with Anderson Silva at 185 pounds for 4.5 rounds, only to get submitted in the dying embers of their thrilling first fight. But when the bad guy took on Jon Jones, if he hadn't been TKO'd in the later stages of round 1, he would have been declared the UFC light heavyweight champion due to a nasty broken toe that Jones sustained. Sure, it wouldn't have been a clean victory, but it's definitely food for thought. Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal has had a long career that went far beyond his later resurrection as a big star in the sport. Seen by many as one of MMA's most underrated talents for years, Masvidal did eventually find his momentum, breaking into the public eye with a huge trio of wins over Darren Till, Ben Askren, and Nate Diaz. But when the time came to finally challenge for UFC gold, his first short-notice attempt didn't exactly set the world on fire. However, when he did rematch Kamaru Usman a clean KO from the champ, well and truly put his title aspirations to bed. But to focus in on that poor spell would be to miss the point of an otherwise excellent career. Yoel Romero. There are freaks of nature, and there are guys like Yoel Romero, and the way he made his immense physicality and explosiveness work for him inside the cage was truly a joy to behold. And with a different set of judges, you could very easily see how Romero would have won UFC gold against Israel Adesanya, even if the fight itself was incredibly dull. Hell, he even gave Robert Whittaker the fight of his life in their rematch. Yoel is without question one of the weirdest athletes to ever lace up gloves and fight, but looking back, with a few minor tweaks, this fiercely athletic former Olympian could have pulled it off. He clearly had the talent to do so. Of that, there is no doubt. Dan Henderson was Pride's first ever two-weight world champion, a trailblazing force who managed to beat several of the greatest fighters of all time across multiple divisions. But in the UFC, his 2 title shots didn't see him carry over his success in Japan. Anderson Silva had little issue submitting him at middleweight, and even though he was able to have some huge moments in there with his old rival Michael Bisping, the Count still managed to find the win on the scorecards. Hendo's an all-timer, though make no mistake, a hard-handed, rock-chin veteran who sustained his career far longer than he had any right to. Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson's 12-fight unbeaten streak at 155 pounds is without question one of the most exciting runs in MMA history. And sure, we never did get to see him take on Khabib Nurmagomedov, but look, that fight was cursed. There's no other way to look at it. When Ferguson's decline eventually set in, boy, was it ugly. But while his prime lasted, El Cocoy was electric, a truly unique fighter in a sea of unique talents. Watching his recent run has been pretty hard, but this dude's legacy is set in stone, and his interim title is just about as good as a championship belt in our eyes. You gotta give Tony that. Alistair Overeem. And finally, we come to one of the UFC heavyweight division's longest-serving veterans. Alistair Overeem had an incredibly long and decorated run in combat sports prior to him signing with the UFC, notably becoming a champion in K1 as well as in Strikeforce. But the fact that he was able to continue fighting into his 40s despite all of his clear chin issues, yeah, the Reem is a total legend of the fight game. And whether he was fighting clean or on a diet of pure horse meat, there's no denying just how fun it was to watch this man in action. Thanks for watching, fight fans. We'll be back soon.